My son cut contact and blocked me for 7 years because of my ex-wife's lies. He only reached out after my wife's death for her inheritance, so I told him she left everything to charity. I never thought I'd be sharing something so personal online, but recent events have left me with nowhere else to turn. I'm a 52-year-old man who lost contact with my only son Brian, 30 male, 7 years ago during my divorce from his mother Linda, 49 female. I've spent countless nights wondering if I could have done things differently, but what happened recently has changed everything. I grew up in a middle-class family in a small town, worked my way through college, and became a real estate agent in 1995. I met Linda at an open house. She was a first-year teacher looking for an apartment, and I was the agent showing the property. We clicked immediately and got married after dating for 2 years. Everything seemed perfect when Brian was born in 1994. I worked hard to build my real estate business, often putting in 60-hour weeks to provide for my family. Linda taught high school English and was active in the community theater. We had what I thought was a good life, annual beach vacations, a nice house in the suburbs, and enough savings for Brian's college fund. I coached Brian's little league team every summer, taught him to fish at our local lake, and never missed his school events despite my busy schedule. Looking back, there were signs I missed. Linda started taking more shopping trips, saying she needed to maintain a professional appearance at school. Our credit card bills grew, but she always had explanations that seemed reasonable at the time. She handled our finances since she had a degree in business education, and I trusted her completely. The truth came out in 2017 when I tried to refinance our house for Brian's graduate school expenses. The bank denied our application, and I discovered we were 3 months behind on mortgage payments. When I dug deeper, I found that Linda had a gambling problem that had spiraled out of control. She had lost over $300,000 at various casinos and online gambling sites. She had taken out loans in my name, maxed out credit cards I didn't know existed, and even borrowed money from her colleagues. When I confronted her, she broke down and admitted everything. But instead of accepting responsibility, she turned it around on me. She told everyone, including Brian, that she only started gambling because I was financially abusive and controlling. She claimed I kept her on a tight allowance and monitored every penny she spent, forcing her to find other ways to have money of her own. The reality was that we had always had joint accounts, and she handled most of our banking. She worked at the same bank where we had our accounts and used her position there to hide statements and redirect mail. She even set up online banking in my name without my knowledge to hide transactions. Brian was 23 and had just started his first job after college when all this happened. Instead of looking at the evidence or asking me for my side of the story, he immediately believed his mother. Linda had always been the more nurturing parent. She was the one who stayed home when he was sick, helped with homework, and was there for teenage drama. I was the disciplinarian who pushed him to excel in school and sports, thinking I was preparing him for the real world. During the divorce, Brian cut all contact with me. He blocked my number, removed me from social media, and returned every letter I sent. Linda threatened legal action for harassment when I tried to reach him through mutual friends. I even drove to his apartment once, but he refused to come to the door. My life fell apart after that. I lost my house in the divorce settlement and had to rebuild my real estate business after Linda's rumors affected my reputation in our small community. I moved to a different city and started over. That's when I met Rachel, 48F, at a grief support group in 2019. She was dealing with the loss of her brother to cancer, and I was there because my therapist suggested I needed to process the loss of my relationship with Brian. Rachel was different from anyone I'd ever met, strong but gentle, successful but humble. Her family owned a chain of high-end restaurants across 3 states, but she worked as a pediatric nurse because she loved helping children. We married in 2020, and Rachel helped me rebuild my life. She encouraged me to keep trying with Brian, sending birthday cards and Christmas gifts even though they were always returned unopened. She wanted to meet him and often talked about how she could help bridge the gap between us. When she was diagnosed with aggressive cancer in 2022, one of her regrets was never getting to know her stepson. Rachel passed away 3 months ago. The last few weeks were brutal, the cancer spread rapidly, and nothing seemed to help. She made me promise to keep trying with Brian, saying life was too short for unresolved pain. Last week, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Brian. He said he saw online that Rachel had passed away and wanted to check on me. My heart nearly stopped. After 7 years of silence, hearing his voice was overwhelming. We agreed to meet at a local restaurant. When we met, I barely recognized him. The teenager who loved baseball and video games was now a bearded man in a business suit. He told me about his life. He's a software engineer now, engaged to Ashley, 28F, and planning to buy a house. Everything seemed to be going well until he brought up Rachel's estate. He knew about her family's businesses and suggested that, as her only stepson, he should receive a portion of the inheritance. He talked about how expensive houses were in the city and how an inheritance would help him start his new life. I was stunned. Rachel had never even met him despite wanting to desperately. I decided to test his intentions. I told him Rachel had left everything to charity. His reaction told me everything I needed to know. He became angry, accused me of manipulating her against him, and said I was still the controlling person his mother had described. That's when he let it slip that he'd been monitoring my social media for years, waiting for Rachel to pass away so he could claim what he believed was his share. The part that hurt the most was when he admitted he deliberately waited a few months after her death to reach out, saying he wanted to give me time to grieve but really needed the money now for a house down payment. 7 years of missing him, sending cards, and hoping for reconciliation, all of it meant nothing compared to the potential inheritance. I told him I was disappointed that money was his only motivation for reconnecting. He tried to backtrack, claiming he genuinely wanted to rebuild our relationship, but his initial reaction had already shown his true colors. I asked him to leave and haven't heard from him since. Update 1. After my last post gained more attention than expected, I feel I should provide more context about my relationship with Brian and the events leading up to the divorce. Growing up, Brian was a bright kid who loved sports and technology. I remember spending weekends teaching him to code on our old computer, thinking it was just a fun activity, not knowing it would become his career. The gambling problem I mentioned wasn't Linda's first betrayal. Throughout our marriage, she had a pattern of manipulation that I only recognized in hindsight. When Brian was in high school, she convinced him to quit the baseball team, claiming I was pushing him too hard, when in reality, he had a real shot at a sports scholarship. She told him I wouldn't be able to afford college anyway, despite our dedicated college fund. Linda worked at First Regional Bank for 15 years, moving up from teller to branch manager. Her position gave her significant control over our finances. She volunteered to handle all our banking because of her expertise, and I trusted her completely. She used her access to hide gambling transactions, create unauthorized accounts, and intercept bank communications. The extent of her gambling was staggering. Beyond the $300,000 lost at casinos, she had borrowed money from her siblings, colleagues, and even some of my real estate clients. She used her position at the bank to approve loans in my name, forging my signature on documents. When everything came to light, she was fired from the bank, but they kept it quiet to avoid bad publicity. During the divorce, Linda painted herself as a victim of financial abuse. She told everyone that I forced her to work at the bank to control her, that I checked her receipts and questioned every purchase. The reality was that she handled all our money. I rarely even looked at our accounts because I trusted her completely. Rachel's background was completely different from Linda's. She came from old money but worked as a pediatric nurse because she genuinely wanted to help others. Her family's restaurant chain, started by her grandfather in the 1960s, had grown into a successful business with locations across 3 states. When we married, she insisted on a prenup, which I readily signed. I had no interest in her family's money. Rachel was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in early 2022. Even during her illness, she tried to help me reconnect with Brian. She wrote him letters that were returned unopened, tried to reach out through his workplace, and even set up a trust fund for him that he never knew about. She believed that someday he would understand the truth and come back into my life. During her final months, Rachel changed her will to leave everything to me, against her family's wishes. She said she trusted me to manage her family's legacy and continue their charitable works. Her family accepted her decision because they had seen how I supported her through her illness and respected her business decisions. The hardest part of Rachel's illness was watching her hope fade of ever meeting Brian. She wanted to tell him about the trust fund she had set up, about her plans to help him start his own tech company, about all the dreams she had for our family. But every attempt at contact was met with silence or rejection. Now, looking at Brian's sudden reappearance, I can't help but wonder if Linda's gambling addiction affected him more than I realized. Did watching his mother's obsession with money shape his values? Did her manipulation tactics become his normal? These questions keep me awake at night. Update 2. Yesterday brought another unexpected visit. Linda showed up at my door. She's lost weight and dyed her hair blonde, but her manipulative nature was unchanged. She said Brian told her about Rachel's inheritance and tried to convince me I was being unfair by not sharing it. Linda's appearance brought back memories I'd rather forget. She talked about how Brian was young during the divorce and didn't understand the situation. I reminded her that he was 23, had graduated college, and was perfectly capable of asking questions and verifying her stories. That's when she revealed something that made everything worse. She admitted to hiding my letters and cards to Brian during the first year after the divorce. She claimed she intercepted my communications to protect him from further pain, but her timing was suspicious. That first year was when I was trying hardest to explain my side of the story. I had written detailed letters about her gambling, included bank statements showing her transfers to casinos, and even had affidavits from bank employees about her forged signatures. She made sure Brian never saw any of it. Linda also admitted to hiding Rachel's attempts to connect with Brian. She intercepted the invitation to Rachel's 50th birthday celebration, where Rachel had hoped to finally meet him. She deleted emails from my work address that contained photos of Rachel's charity events, where she helped children with cancer, causes that would have touched Brian's heart, as he lost a childhood friend to leukemia. The conversation took an even darker turn when Linda suggested that since Rachel never had children of her own, it would be natural for her wealth to go to Brian. She completely ignored the fact that Rachel's family is still alive and actively involved in the businesses. She talked about Rachel's inheritance as if it was a pot of money just waiting to be claimed, not a family legacy built over generations. I told Linda that unless she was willing to tell Brian the truth about everything, the gambling, the hidden letters, the forged documents, and her years of manipulation, I didn't want to hear from either of them again. She left without making any promises, but her visit confirmed what I had suspected. She's still manipulating the situation for financial gain. Update 3. Brian called me this morning, his tone noticeably different from our previous interaction. He apologized for his behavior during our meeting and said he'd been thinking about everything. He mentioned that he wanted to make things right and invited me to his wedding, saying it would mean a lot to have me there. While part of me wants to believe him, I can't ignore the timing of this invitation coming right after his mother's visit. He didn't mention the inheritance directly, but he did talk about how expensive weddings are these days and how he and Ashley are trying to save for both the wedding and a house. After careful consideration, I've decided not to attend the wedding. The painful reality is that Brian didn't reach out when Rachel was diagnosed with cancer, despite seeing my posts about her treatment. He didn't contact me when she was in hospice, even though mutual friends told me he knew about it. He waited until after her death, when he thought there might be money involved. Some might think I'm being too harsh, but I've spent 7 years trying to maintain contact only to be completely shut out. Rachel taught me that sometimes protecting yourself means accepting that relationships can't be forced or bought. I'm focusing now on managing her family's businesses and continuing the charitable work she was passionate about. I've realized that sometimes the hardest part of being a parent is accepting that your adult child has made choices you can't fix. Brian chose to believe his mother's lies, chose to ignore evidence of her deception, and chose to reach out only when he thought there was financial gain involved. These were his choices as an adult, and I have to respect them, even if they break my heart. This will be my final update. Thank you to everyone who offered support and advice. Your perspectives helped me see that I'm not wrong for protecting Rachel's legacy and maintaining my boundaries.